Hello everybody and welcome back to the Pottery Corner, my studio down on the south coast of England near Chichester. Today we're going to do the third part in the Hydrangea Head series where we're going to do glazing and using the glass frit. So if you haven't already seen, there is a preparation video of the equipment that you will need to follow along with this tutorial. And in the preparation video, I show you the kit with the cutters and your choice of 3 colours of glass out of 15 colours so that you can follow along with this project, which are in my Etsy shop. So that's part 1. Part 2 is the actual make with porcelain, and I go through the whole tutorial of how to make your own, and these are mine now through the bisque firing. So I'll show you those in a moment, but today we're going to do the glazing and putting the frit on. These are the finished hydrangea heads, and as you can see, all of the colour, apart from a tiny little bit of coloured glaze, is done with glass. So I use Bullseye Frit, which is glass that I used to use when I was a stained glass artist. Used to do stained glass windows. Travelled into pottery, don't quite know how that happened, but we travelled into pottery, so I now use the glass in my work as well as just glaze. So let's get on with it. I'll show you what I've got out on the table and then we'll get started. Okay, so my hydrangea heads are out of the bisque firing. I'm still keeping them in the tin. So we were using the tin just to balance them on while we work on them. It saves them falling over. They do stand up, they all stand up independently, but obviously these are so delicate. I actually kept the pieces that came off of my 3 heads in the bisque firing because they're so delicate that when you pick them up in their greenware state, often you'll find that a piece will come off. So I keep them in their tins because that way I know that they're safe and they're not going to get knocked. So that is the first one. This one is the mop head or lace cap hydrangea with the sort of buds on the top. So that one is slightly different. And then the third one I just finished off as an all over flower head. So again, that one is an all over flower head. And as I say, they do all stand so that they will go in the kiln. And as you can see, I can get my hands underneath here, so I know that the glaze is not going to touch the kiln shelf. Okay, so we're keeping them in the pots for now. There isn't really any way that I can reaffix these little pieces, but luckily you can see where they've come off from if you look carefully. One of those came off of there. Don't know which one, probably that one. Came off of there, but you know, there's so many petals on there that it doesn't really show, so don't worry too much if you do get a little bit of breakage. They are so delicate that they do occasionally get broken around the edges. Okay, so what I've got on the table, I've got Amico's Mixing Clear, which is the transparent glaze that I'm using. It's a lead-free glaze, so it's kinder to the environment. I've got some Amico Pear, which is glaze number C41. I have a little henna pot. So the Indian hand painting with henna, these are henna bottles, readily available from Amazon. They come in usually in packs of 3, and they also come with lots and lots of little different sized nozzles, which are really, really useful. I did actually buy these from a pottery supplier. But actually I like the henna bottles because they're smaller in my hand and I can use them like a pen. So I do slip trailing and underglazing and whatever, but I also use them for glazing. So that's just a little henna pot of my glaze. That's my glaze test tile to show me how the glaze comes out. I've got a dusting brush. I've got a couple of glaze brushes that I'm going to use. I've got the glass. Now, as I was saying, in the hydrangea kit, you get a choice of 3 colours. And there are lots of colours, so there's lots of blues, there's lots of greens. And they're different grades of glass, but it won't matter because obviously they're all going to melt. But they're really pretty, and you can choose which 3 you want. So that's really good. And the 3 that I have chosen to use today are number 1, which is light turquoise, number 6, which is emerald green, and number 11, which is spring green. So those are the 3 colours of glass that I'm going to be using on my heads. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is, I think I'll demonstrate on this mop head one. So the first thing I'm going to do is give it a good dust with my dusting brush, because I don't want the glaze to crawl because it's got dust on it. I know some people wash their bisque. If you are going to wash the bisque, be very careful, because obviously these petals are really delicate, and this is a really, really soft brush. So I'm just making sure that I get in all the nooks and crannies. I'm going to turn it over carefully and just do this under section here. I'm not actually going to glaze this part, but I will glaze the petals around the edge. So I just want to make sure that they are dust free. And I'm going to pop it back so we're all ready to go. And the first thing I'm going to do is just pop on a couple of layers of mixing clear all over. So I'll get started on that, and then I'll fast forward the camera because it's not very interesting. I do have a transparent dipping glaze, and I don't use it for this because there are so many holes that you have to get into that I find I'm dipping the hydrangea head into the bucket, and it takes too long for me to get it all over. So I don't actually dip my hydrangea heads into the transparent bucket. I find it's much easier to paint it on. Although it's an elongated process, you get a better result, because if this transparent glaze goes on too thick, it glows cloudy. So I really don't want a great big thick blob of glaze all over everywhere and in all these little spaces. So that's why I'm brushing it on. So I'm just going to take the mixing clear, which I've given it a good shake, and I'm just going to go over, as you would normally with any type of coloured glaze, and getting into all of those spaces in between the petals to make sure that the glaze is completely covering. So I'm going to carry on with that, and I'll bring you back in when I've done those coats. I'm just checking by turning the piece over that I've got all the under petals. So looking at it from a different angle, very often you'll see the places that you've missed. So I'm just checking that I've got all of those bits covered with glaze. Right, so that's my first coat. I'm just going to leave that to dry for a minute. And in the meantime, grab myself a nice lemongrass and ginger tea in one of my favourite pug mugs with my sissy on the front. So we'll just leave that to dry for a second. All right, so that's just about dry. I'm just going to go over the more obvious places with a second coat. I don't want to make it too thick, but I do want to make sure that it's actually covered. So I'm just going to quickly pop on a light second coat. Okay, so I've done my second coat and I'm just leaving that to dry. I'm going to do the other two in a minute off camera because I'm sure it's quite boring for you to watch me glazing the heads with transparent glaze. Whilst I'm having my quick cuppa, and as sort of a commercial break, I'd be really grateful if you would consider just pressing the subscribe button. I don't normally ask, but it would really help my channel to grow, and it would be really kind of you if you could just press the subscribe button, and then you'll be notified when my new content comes out every week, so you'll see it pop up on your feed. So I've put 2 coats of mixing clear onto each of the 3 hydrangea heads. So we're now ready for the next stage. Now I've popped a little bit of Amico pear into my henna bottle, so we're ready for the next bit. Now I'm going to just fill the flower centres. So when we were putting these on during the make, we pressed them on and left a flower centre. And I'm just going to pop a little bit of pear into each of these flower centres, just to give it a bit of colour further down on the head rather than the top. I don't really need it on the top because I know that the glass is going to colour it. But as you come further down, you'll see that there's not as much glass in this bottom section here, and I've used the pear to give me the colour, because if the glass isn't contained within a little pod, it just runs through. So that's why I've put the colour just on the edges and in the middle of the flowers there. So I'm just going to go round and just put a tiny bit, doesn't have to be very much, just in the flower centres. You don't have to do all of them, up to you where you put it, but this is the way that I do it. So I'm just going to go round and pop those in the flower centres on each of the heads. So I'll speed this up. That's probably as much as I want to pop onto that one. One. Okay, so that's those done. Okay, so we're ready for the next bit. The pear is just drying. I'm just going to let it just sit and dry for a minute. So I'm going to mix my glass. Now, you don't have to mix your glass together. I just think it makes a better application if you mix your glass together. So the packs in the kit are they're 15 grams, but they actually weigh out at 16 grams to make sure that I'm not shortchanging you. So you could just take a little bit out of each pouch and pop it in a bowl, or you could use them individually, entirely up to you. You don't need very much, so I'm just going to mix a little bit. So that was about less than half a spoon of this one, which is number 6, which is emerald green. And this one is number 11, spring green. So again, I'm just going to use half a spoon. Some of the glass is coarser than others. It doesn't matter, it's going to melt. It won't matter whether it's a coarse or a finer glass. So this one is light turquoise, number 1. So again, I'm just going to use about half a spoon of that. Now, the nice thing about this Bullseye Frit is that it has been tumbled, so it is not sharp. So you can touch it with your fingers without cutting yourself. So that's the reason that I use it. If you're going to use a smashed up wine bottle or a smashed up gin bottle, you can only use one colour, because the coefficient of the glass between bottles is different, and it will craze and it will crack and it will be very dangerous. So if you are going to use your own glass, please be careful, because obviously it's not been tumbled, so it will be very sharp. And you can only use one colour. So if you're going to use a Bombay Sapphire bottle or a Bristol cream bottle or even a wine bottle, only use one type of glass, because otherwise you'll find that the glass will do funny things in the kiln. So I would suggest using this Bullseye glass, which is actually made for glass fusing, and although I'm taking the temperature very much higher than it would be taken for glass fusing, it works very well. And I talked in the first video, the preparation video, about the sacrificial cookies. So these are my sacrificial cookies, and in fact 2 of them have glass on them, which very nicely shows you what happens in the kiln. So I use these to stand the hydrangea heads on, so that when the glass drips down, it drips onto the cookie and not onto my kiln shelf. So that's very important. And as I say, nice glass on there to show you that it does happen. So make sure that you're using sacrificial cookies. I do use them several times if I can. Obviously, I have to be a bit careful that that doesn't then remelt and go over onto the kiln shelf from there, but it should be okay. So those are my sacrificial cookies. So I'm going to start with this one. And it really is very simple and most enjoyable. As you can see, the pear is still just drying. There's some little areas that are still wet. Before I start, I should say that I've got a mat, a cloth on my studio table here, because if the glass goes everywhere, which it does, I can just put it up in the mat and then pop it back in a pot so that I'm not wasting my glass and it's not going everywhere. So I should have said that earlier, but I do have a mat underneath my workstation. So here is my glass, the 3 different colours mixed in the pot, and I'm just going to put it on like you would if you were putting hundreds and thousands on a cake. Now I don't want too much, so I am going to slightly, with some of the larger pieces of glass, just pop 1 or 2 in the top section so that I know what colour I've got in there, so that it's not all blue or it's not all green. So I'm just going to put the larger chips in the top section where I can see what they are. And when we were doing the make, I was saying about making these little pods, and the reason you can now see is that the glass collects in the pod. And whilst it will melt and flow out, what is left in the pod will be coloured. Okay, so that was the reason for making sure there was somewhere to catch the glass. I mean, even on this piece here, which I hope you can see, there is just this little section here where the glass is going to get caught. So I can put a couple of pieces in there, so that should hold there. So I'm just going to spend a minute just popping this glass on into the pods that I can see. I don't want too much on there, but by the same token, I do have to make sure I've got enough. So I'm picking up now some of the smaller grains of glass and just popping them on, a bit like putting salt and pepper on a meal. Very nice little activity. I'm trying to make sure that I've put each colour on each bit. So as you can see, this bit here that's just got this one green spot needs a little bit of blue, so I'll put a bit of blue in there. And keep turning your work round to make sure that you can kind of see what has landed where. I'm using the bowl, if I do it this way around, I'm using the bowl to catch what's not actually going to hit or what's not going to stick. So I'm sort of trying to recapture it. As it goes round. Hope that some of it catches in those little areas. Whatever comes off is going to come off anyway, so if it doesn't stick on at the top at this stage, then it's not going to be on the bottom, on your piece at the finish. Okay, so I've got enough on there. There's enough on there. I don't want to go too mad. I don't want it too thick. So that is now done, ready to go in the kiln. And as I say, when it goes into the kiln, I shall have a sacrificial cookie underneath it, stand it on the cookie, and it will be fired to my normal glaze temperature, which is 1225 degrees centigrade, so 1225 degrees centigrade. So that will be normal glaze firing temperature. I will put them in the top of the kiln, which in my kiln is the coldest part of the kiln, the coldest shelf. So if you have a colder part of your kiln, you might want to just put them on the coldest part so it doesn't get quite as hot, but they are going up to a cone 6. And I'm just going to finish off the other two and I'll show you those before I take them down. Right, so that's number 2. Right, so that's all my glass, and that's all that took was 3 half spoons of the glass to do 3 heads. So it's very economical on the glass. And I'm just going to spend a minute just double checking that I'm happy with the distribution of the glass. I mean, obviously it is going to melt, but I do want to just make sure that I haven't missed any sections that could do with just a knob of glass in. So I might just take a tiny bit more out, and if I can see somewhere where a piece of glass is going to sit and stay, I'll just poke it in just so that it gives me that little bit more colour. So if you see here, that bit can go in there and that bit can go in there. So I mean, you can spend forever fiddling with them, but you get to a point where you think, yeah, that's fine. There's enough glass on there, there's enough colour. So spend a little bit of time with yours, just making sure that you've given it as much chance to stay in a pod as you can. If there's a little shelf somewhere that you can just pop a little bit of glass like here, I mean, it's probable that most of that will dribble through, but you might get left with a little bit of the blue coming down. Okay, so that's those done. So I'm going to take them down, pop them in the kiln, get them into a glaze firing, hopefully tomorrow, and then I'll pull them out of the kiln so that you can see what the actual ones from the tutorial look like. I'm hoping that they will look very similar to my demonstrator models. So hopefully they should come out like this, but we'll see, we'll see. Okay, so the big reveal. I've just come down into the kiln room. The kiln is cold. So I flicked the lid. Oh, you know, we've had the tiniest of sneakies. So I'm just going to lift this lid up. The hydrangeas are in the top. As I said, I pack them in the top of the kiln. So here they are. Let's just have a look and see how much glass drippage we have had. Right, so let's just be careful round the other bits that are in here. I shall just take these out just to get them out of the way. Right, let's have a little look. Okay, so this is the first one. They do look rather beautiful. I hope you're catching that. Actually, there isn't. Oh, there is some glass on there. I was going to say, I don't think that one was the sacrificial cookie that actually had any glass on it. But that is the finished piece. That's the lace cap. Actually, the glass distribution on there is really nice. And as you can see, those little dots of green are the pear. So it just takes the colour down further. So that is the lace cap version. Let's see whether there's any glass under there. So no glass on that one. And there isn't quite as much colour on there where the glass has melted through the flower heads. But actually still the pear, again, gives you colour further down. That's really pretty, lovely. That's the same cutters that are in the hydrangea kit. So yeah, really pretty. Isn't that lovely? Again, there's not quite as much colour on that one. Probably could have done with just a little bit more glass, but still lovely. And the last one, carefully. There, I think there was some glass already on that cookie, but I think there's a bit more glass now. And that one is the third. Beautiful, aren't they? So yeah, I'm really happy with those. They're really lovely. So quite an easy process to make these beautiful porcelain hydrangea heads. I hope you've really enjoyed this series of videos and that you follow along and make your own. So if you make your own version, do remember to send me a picture via the website, and my website address is in the description box below. So pop me a picture and you may get a shout out on my next kiln opening with the picture of your work. So don't forget to send me those. I love to see them. It's really interesting to see how people take the project. So I'll pop a little picture up on the end of the fired version of these hydrangea heads, and I shall see you all on the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye for now.